Good morning, y'all. We are back with another edition of DNVR Rams Live. As always, I am your host, Justin Michael. Hope everybody has had a solid couple of days. Haven't gone live since last week. Had a couple of audio-only podcasts. Great to have Kevin Lytle on the show, as always. We've got a lot to get into. It's been a busy recruiting time. We've got some CSU football news. We're going to focus more on hoops tomorrow. The men obviously coming off of a 75-60 loss to San Diego State in Viejas Tuesday night. Late night game. The Rams hung around for a while. Also kind of looks like they might lose by 30 plus at some points early on in that second half. So to fall by 15 feels fairly predictable. It's just not a setting where teams tend to play well with a lot of new pieces. And one of the tough parts in terms of establishing success within the Mountain West in this modern era is just the lack of continuity, because when you look back at so many of the great players, you know, even like Isaiah Stevens, David Roddy, even guys like that struggled in their first trip to Viejas. San Diego State is just so physical. They hand check the hell out of you, really beat you up and bully you, bring a level of intensity and physicality on the defensive side that you're just really not accustomed to at the collegiate level. Going the other way, it feels like they get a lot of calls. I'm not complaining. It's all very predictable. Teams go to San Diego State, they get beaten up. They don't get a ton of calls the other way. You hear a lot of complaining. Then San Diego State fans feel like they don't get a good whistle anywhere else because they're so used to getting such a favorable whistle at home. And so then their media complains every time they play at places like CSU. It's the same storylines every single year, but it's not surprising that CSU struggled in that one. I will say Kyan Evans was highly intriguing, and he just continues to make more and more plays, which is huge for this program. Good morning to everyone. Shout out to Charlie in the Toyota chat. Appreciate everybody that's rocking with us this morning. Always give us a thumbs up on YouTube if you wouldn't mind. The women, again, we'll talk more hoops tomorrow, so I'll go more in depth on kind of what I saw against San Diego State, as well as what I'm expecting on Saturday, which is, it was always the more winnable matchup of the two. It's really a tough one. I mean, CSU in the Medved era has not had a ton of success in Laramie, and even the wins that they've had against even some of the not so great Wyoming teams over the years have kind of come down to the wire. I certainly expect this team, which has played really hard under Sundance Wicks, to give the Rams a tough game on Saturday. It's going to be really cold, probably a pretty sketchy drive. I don't anticipate it being the most ruckus crowd of all time. Certainly make safe decisions out there this weekend. No matter what you're doing, they're calling for like minus 30 wind chill, which is just absurd. But a big one coming up for the men against Wyoming on Saturday. Really a must-win situation if you want to keep pace with the top four and at least have an opportunity to push for the conference title. I said it a couple of days ago. Feels to me like CSU is firmly the fifth or sixth best team in the league. I think they're number 5 right now. But it does kind of feel like there's a gap between CSU and that top four, at least in terms of consistency. Having said that, you see teams like New Mexico lose to San Jose State and some of the weird stuff we've had. Utah State lost to UNLV last night. It just really feels like the league is wide open in a way that we haven't seen. It's different. Like last year, it was wide open because you had so many perceived contenders. This year, I'm not sold on necessarily anyone. I think Utah State has looked the best, the most consistently. I believe in that San Diego State brand. I just think what they do defensively is going to translate year to year. And obviously Miles Byrd, who is a guy that CSU recruited really heavily, had a chance to land a couple years ago along with Micah Parrish. Both of them end up at San Diego State. He went off against CSU. But we'll see. We'll talk more hoops tomorrow. Shout out to the women, though. They pulled off a big win over San Diego State last night. They're now 4-1 in the league. They already have a sweep of San Diego State. I felt like getting that one on the road was massive, especially after falling to UNLV. It just allows you to keep pace within that top third of the league, which is all you're trying to do at this point. Likely going to come down to CSU or UNLV for the league, but you're going to have to steal a couple of these away from home, and you're going to have to be really solid in your own building, which is always the case in the Mountain West. Appreciate everybody rocking with us in the Toyota chat. It's good to see the chat active with some all-time Ram great fans. Appreciate all you guys. We're going to get into a big signing for CSU football, which is the big focus of today's show. Kojo Antwi, former 4-star prospect, former top 150 recruit in the country. He signed with CSU. We're going to talk about what that wide receiver core looks like. I'll give an update on some of the transfer departures, give a couple of thoughts on that. We'll give our first Mountain West football power ranking of 2025. I don't know how much stock you put into it in January. We're going to be projecting a lot, and a lot can happen between now and the fall. But, this is a podcast. It's what we do. I'll get to your questions, comments. We'll star them, get to all of that at the end. Real quick, though, I do want to shout out a couple of our partners, the fine folks that make all of this possible, putting on this great show. And I'm going to start with our friends over at Game Time. Guys, Game Time, they're making it easier than ever to get great deals on all of your favorite events. They've got tickets for sports. They've got tickets for concerts, theater, comedy, you name it, they've got it. And what's awesome is with the Game Time Picks feature, it's just so easy to find the best deals in town. It's a sweet little curation function, and it filters out all the fluff, shows you the best of the best. I love the Game Time app because of how easy it is to use. Like I said, they've got everything. It's easily the first place I check when I'm thinking about going out, catching, a Nuggets game or something like that. I'll be in Denver tonight for the Avs game. If you're, looking for a great matchup, they're playing the Oilers. They've got great deals on Game Time. Game Time Picks curation makes it easier to find value for your tickets. They've got the lowest price guarantee. They've got the Game Time ticket coverage, so you can rest assured knowing they've got the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. We try to find good companies to work with. Game Time is that. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, use that code DNVR for $20 off your first purchase. Terms to apply. Again, create an account, redeem that code DNVR for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. I also want to shout out Toyota. Toyota, a proud partner of CSU Athletics and the official vehicle of DNVR. Trucks have always been a part of Toyota's DNA for generations. Toyota has built durable legends destined for greatness, perfect for Colorado. Whether you're conquering off-road trails or hauling the weight of the world, there's a Toyota truck that's just right for you. Like the all-new 2024 Tacoma or the return of the iconic 2024 Land Cruiser. They have 17 models with available all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive. Going to come in real handy throughout the winter, especially like I said, this weekend it's going to be cold and snowy and windy. You need that all-wheel drive sometimes. It makes a huge difference. They've got 16 hybrid vehicles to choose from. So if you're trying to, stay green, they've got options for you there. Toyota, a proud partner of CSU Athletics, the official vehicle of DNVR. Toyota, let's go places. All right, I appreciate the love in the Toyota chat. Taylor says, wanted to make the drive to Laramie Saturday, but probably won't with the weather coming in. I'll be real with you guys. I don't think it's worth it for most Ram fans this weekend. That drive to Laramie is just sketch. I've done it in whiteout conditions when it's snowing sideways and it's windy and you can't see in front of you, and it's pretty terrifying. Like I applaud anybody that has that type of commitment, that's willing to make the drive. You are stalwarts. You are proud to be, but I don't think you are lesser of a fan if you make the decision to watch at home this weekend, because 287 is the deadliest highway in America. It's not something to mess around with in the winter. And first things first, I want you guys to all be safe. So make good decisions, be safe out there this weekend. Only drive if you feel comfortable in those conditions. Some people, it doesn't faze them. They're fine. They'll drive in anything. Others, they're gonna make the choice to stay at home. It feels like a remote weekend, just being smart out there. But like I said, make good decisions. Brief news update before we get into the recruiting stuff. James Finley officially moving over to wide receiver coach. I think that move makes a ton of sense. Players coach, great relationship with all these guys. He's been the tight ends coach the last couple of years. That's kind of the natural progression of position coaches. It feels like that happens quite a bit. You bring a guy in, you like what they can do with pass catchers, but you already have a receivers coach. You put him at the tight ends coach. Then you lose Savage to USC, obviously. Finley slides over to wide receiver. He's going to be a big part of what CSU does in West Coast recruiting. He already has been, but especially now without Savage. Again, I think that's a big move, especially, when you're trying to retain some of this top talent, like Lewis Brown, for instance, a guy who, a Savage going out the door, maybe looks around and is like, am I still sure that I want to be here? But based on everything that I have heard, LB has a great relationship with Finley. LB has a great relationship with BFN as well. So I think it'll be fine. But again, I think that move of Finley from tight end to wide receivers coach makes a lot of sense. Also, we found out yesterday, according to Pete Thamel, Grant Chestnut will be the new tight ends coach. Previously was the offensive coordinator at Navy and Kennesaw State. So he's coached at a high level. Nice veteran presence to add to the staff. Assumingly coming over at the recommendation of Tyson Summers, because he was actually a analyst, I should say, for Western Kentucky last year. They're bringing a couple of guys over from that WKU staff. Interesting to see how that will all play out. I said last week that I anticipate Jay Norvell will add an offensive coordinator or a play caller. You can call it whatever you want. We haven't heard anything, obviously, since. We'll monitor the situation. We shall see. I still anticipate that he will. But admittedly, it has gone a little quiet the last couple of weeks. So I'm wondering, maybe if things have potentially changed, or maybe it's just slow behind the scenes. We'll have to see how that all kind of works out. But I still anticipate it. That's my gut as of now. Just have not gotten any type of new information over the last week or so. Aaron in the Toyota chat says, have you noticed a difference in characteristics, experience, etc., in the new coaches we are getting as compared to those we are losing? That's an interesting question. That's one that has multiple layers to it. I think the coaches that they've added as a whole versus what they've lost the last couple of years, they've lost some up and coming guys. Guys like Savage, who has decent experience now because of what he's done at CSU and then Nevada before that. But Summers, this tight ends coach that they're bringing over, Chestnut, these are guys that have a lot of experience. And I think some of that probably comes down to CSU's investment in football. I think the athletic department is willing to spend right now, and they're allowing Norvell to fill his staff with veteran coaches, which frankly costs money. It costs a lot of money to hire veteran football coaches. But that's an interesting question, and I think I'm going to have to come back to that subject, because that's one I want to put more thought into and explore some of the other layers. But I think just from an experience standpoint, that's one thing that's jumped out to me. The coaches that they are bringing in have a lot of experience, and that's kind of different from a lot of the coaches that Norvell brought over when he very first came from Nevada. Let's get into the recruiting stuff. Intro's almost 15 minutes here. Let's get to the bread and butter. Kojo Antwi, hopefully I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. That's what I heard on a couple of Ohio State podcasts. Former 4-star prospect, ranked number 133 overall prospect in the country a couple years back. Top 15 recruit coming out of Georgia. He's a really highly productive player at the high school ranks. Has spent the last 2 years with Ohio State. Only has one career catch. Naturally, you're going to get some snarkiness from the trolls online when it comes to that. I'll talk about that here in just a second. But he caught 20 touchdowns at Lambert High School, solid program out in Georgia. Averaged 15 yards a catch, over 121 receptions, little over 1,800 receiving yards. Really steady production between his junior and senior years. I like to see that. Guys that aren't just one-year wonders were steady contributors for a significant period of time. That was certainly Antwi. I believe he had 9 touchdowns his junior year, 11 his senior year. So again, really solid. Receiving stats too can be a little bit tough to to take away from just because you are quarterback dependent and system dependent and at wide receiver. So I mean, like, you'll see some absurd stats with like a high school receiver that has 50 something receiving touchdowns, but that just means they're a program that spreads it around. I don't think 20 touchdowns, 1,800 yards. That's like jumping off the page. It's obviously really solid production. I mean, it's nothing to scoff at by any means. But I just mean, like, I don't think a guy needs to have 5,000 yards and 100 touchdowns in their career to be an intriguing prospect. Now, that is the case sometimes. I think back to like Jalen Dupree coming out of Malvern High School. I mean, his production was freaking absurd. He had like Derrick Henry type numbers during his 3-year run there as a starting running back. But really steady. And when I watch him on Huddle, you can see what really translates in terms of his game. I mean, he's got burner speed. Reportedly ran a 4.4 in high school. Looks like it's me when I watch him on Huddle. It's obviously been a couple of years now, but he's a guy that is capable of taking the top off of the defense. That's a little bit of a tongue twister on any given play. I mean, he is truly a burner. I think he can replicate some of what was lost with Caleb Goody going to Cincinnati. He obviously does not have the production collegiately. Only one career catch, has been a backup throughout his time at Ohio State. And it's just funny to me. Like, I see some of the snarky replies largely from like CU fans and whatnot, but other folks as well. I saw a couple of Wyoming fans chirping on both my post about it and the Barstool CSU post about it. And yeah, I mean, you're not landing a dude who has produced a ton at the collegiate level, but also to say that he's a scrub because he wasn't starting at Ohio State, that seems a little bit disingenuous to me. Have you taken a look at that wide receiver room that Ohio State has had over the last 5 years? They are on a generational run when it comes to receiving talent. And I think a perfect example of that is Julian Fleming, who was, I believe, the number one recruit overall in 2020, not just wide receiver, like the number one recruit in the country. Signs with Ohio State. He plays, he makes some plays here and there, had a nice sophomore, junior season, but ultimately ends up transferring to Penn State because that wide receiver room is just so stacked with talent. I mean, you had Marvin Harrison Jr. the last couple of years. Before that, Garrett Wilson. What they have right now is just absurd. I mean, I don't want to rant too much about Ohio State, but I just don't know what you're supposed to do defensively between God, I'm drawing a blank on the freshman's name. Jeremiah Smith and some of the other guys they've got out there. It's just it's a tough place to see the field. And I would believe that by coming to CSU, you have an opportunity, obviously, to get a change of scenery, but you also have an opportunity to play at a level where I think those traits are going to stand out a little bit more. At a school like Ohio State, every receiver runs a 4.4. All the corners you're going against are elite. I mean, it is the best of the best. You come to a program like CSU in the Mountain West, you might have an opportunity to let those plus traits shine a little bit more. That speed stands out a little bit more in the Mountain West. I talked about that, with Caleb Goody going to Cincinnati. As fast as he is, as athletic as he is, and he is a burner. He can run with the best of them in the country. He has a lot of things he needs to improve on in terms of route running and being a more complete receiver. That speed, that really stood out in the Mountain West. There aren't that many guys that can run like that. It's a dime a dozen, in the Big 12. And I think sometimes people find that out the harder way. That's not to say that he can't go and have a really nice stretch there. I think Goody has a ton of talent. I was bummed to lose him. But coming back the other way, I think a guy like Antwi, who, is more of a number 2 at a place like Ohio State, can come to the Colorado State and, kind of rewrite his career. He has 2 years of eligibility remaining, an opportunity to get on the field, hopefully make some plays. All these guys have dreaming of going to the NFL at some point. And what I really like about him, and obviously I haven't had an opportunity to speak with him yet or anything like that, but just on the surface, I like that he stayed committed to his team. He's one of 3 Ohio State transfers that elected to remain with the Buckeyes through the entirety of the college football playoff. Now, I understand, like I've talked about it, the academic calendar makes things a little bit wonky with this whole transfer portal process, and it sounds like they're going to change the windows, which I think is necessary. There's a proposal on the board to essentially have like a 10-day window in January after the bowl games and eliminate the spring transfer window for everybody except graduate transfers, which I'm all in favor for because it's just freaking chaos right now. But I like a guy that stays committed to his team because I don't have beef with somebody who wants an opportunity to better themselves. He was at Ohio State for 3 years. They won a ton of games, obviously, but he's not playing. He's got one career catch. It most certainly was not what he envisioned when he signed with that program as a top 150 recruit. But instead of just saying, see you guys later and dipping on his teammates, he's remained committed to them, and he might win a national championship because of it. And again, maybe I'm putting too much into this. I don't know the guy personally yet, but that's a high character trait that stands out to me. And I like that. I like that he stayed committed to Ohio State. And I'm really excited about what he can possibly bring to the table here. Oh man, shout out to T here. We got super chat. Where do you get your Colorado gear from? This is a Coors Light sweatshirt, courtesy of our friends at Coors Light, which was really cool. They hooked up our whole staff with them, but I appreciate the love, my man. Thanks for tuning in. A lot of the cool stuff I have, honestly, like I have a decent fashion sense, but a lot of the best stuff I have has definitely been gifted to me or inherited from my dad, to be honest. My dad's got some vintage sports swag that has been big for me over the years. Anyways, getting back on track here, and I appreciate you for doing the super chat there. I like what he brings to the table. I think his speed is something that they could use. I think you have very likely a really solid mix of wide receivers to work with. You're certainly deep, and it's possible that you lose a couple of these guys by August. You know, some of these guys might go through the motions in spring, recognize I'm not going to be on the field and leave. We'll see what happens there. But I think you have, you know, Lewis Brown, Jordan Ross. Those are kind of like your lead outside receivers. In this system, you're going to move around a lot. So you're not necessarily always outside, always inside. And especially if they're going to go back to more of an air raid-esque offense and not this West Coast-based scheme that they've been running the last year or so. But I think, you know, LB, Jordan Ross, those are kind of like your lead receivers, like if you will, Torrey and LB from 2023, essentially. Like those are the top two guys in my estimation. Now maybe Antwi comes in and just blows us away. I certainly think there's a path to him getting on the field again. I think he can kind of fill that Caleb Goody role where you're just trying to get him the football in space. Maybe it's over the top. Maybe it's a little jet motion play. You know, maybe you're doing an end around. Maybe it's just a little crosser. You want to get the football in his hands because he is that level of athlete that he can just really flip a game in one play. I think he can be a dynamic return man for you as well. But I kind of envision LB, one, because of his experience and his talent. Like I'm really high on Lewis Brown. I think he's an NFL receiver. I think he's your number one. I think Jordan Ross in year 2 makes a big leap. We started to see that chemistry grow with BFN as the season progressed. They were going to him in big third down spots, but he has an opportunity there, I think, to really make a big leap in year 2. Then you have, you know, like Kojo coming over from Ohio State. I think he's a guy that could potentially be in the slot for you, potentially out wide too, just seeing there. Armani Winfield played a lot of outside this year. We'll kind of see what happens with him ultimately. Another guy who I think has a lot of talent, a really high ceiling, needs to do some things in terms of being a more complete receiver, just in terms of route running. Had some drops this year, obviously, but he's really, really talented. And I actually think he's someone that, if he's willing to embrace it, might benefit from having a little bit more talent around him at the receiver position. Like he was essentially your number one receiver by the end of the year. I know not statistically speaking, but like he was basically the guy getting the most targets on a week-to-week basis over that last month. And I'm just not sure he's a number one right now. You know, I think next to a guy like LB, where you can kind of take some of that attention away from him, I think it's going to allow some of those plus athletic traits he has to shine. Cam says, don't get excited about a 4-star coming in from a bigger school because it doesn't always mean good things. Look at Malachi Nelson, the 5-star, who went to Boise and didn't do anything. Yeah, that's a fair critique, Cam. I know you're a Buffs guy, so you're just coming in and trying to troll shit up. But I do think that is a fair critique. And the reality is there are no guarantees in the recruiting game. Some of CSU's most highly touted recruits the last couple of years have not necessarily worked out. Others have, but Damian Henderson, he's a 4-star guy. Never really saw the field. Now he's at Sacramento State. Same deal with Mekhi Fox, another 4-star guy. Couldn't even crack the 2 deep. And I think he was at Pasadena Community College this past year. On the same vein, it can work out for you. Chigozie Anuzium, starting corner for CSU for a couple years. He was a former 4-star guy at Cal, comes to CSU, really develops over his last 2 years. Now he's in the NFL. Preston Williams comes over from Tennessee, former number 1 wide receiver in the country, a 5-star prospect. Comes to CSU, has an insane season. There were a lot of layers in that, and he had some off-field issues. And as talented as he was, I almost think bringing him into the program did more damage than good, which, again, that can kind of lean into what you're saying there. But that is certainly a fair critique, and there are no guarantees in the recruiting game, and that's something I've talked about a lot. Some of the best players in program history, unranked 1-star, 2-star prospects. We've seen 4, 5-star guys completely, fall through the cracks. Other guys really, really work out, and it's a lot like the NFL draft. Those evaluations are essentially based on somewhat. I'm a little bit more skeptical of the recruiting process just because I think it's influenced by what schools are recruiting you, but in theory, it's about, how their traits are going to translate to the next level. That's how it's been explained to me from the experts from 247 Sports and stuff like that when we have them on the show. It's not a guarantee, but I mean, if you're 6'3" and you run, a 4.4, you're more likely to succeed just based on some of those traits. Those are things that you cannot coach. And Antwi has a very intriguing athletic profile. Like, he has everything in theory it takes to succeed, to be a big time impactful playmaker. We shall see, though. I mean, obviously didn't work out for him at Ohio State, but you're hoping that some of those plus traits will translate. And you really only need to hit on a couple of these guys to make a major difference. You signed 3 4-stars this offseason, a couple of corners and a receiver. You signed a couple of other guys that were highly recruited and didn't really pan out, like Jacob Ellis at Iowa State, former JUCO All-American Defensive Player of the Year. If you hit on 2-3 of those, that's a huge impact for your roster, especially like at a level like the Mountain West. It's not the SEC. You're not trying to beat Bama. You're trying to beat Boise State, which is a little bit different of a level there. Some other receivers I expect to be in the mix. We've talked about LB. We've talked about Kojo, Jordan Ross, and Winfield. I think Tommy Maher, who we started to see as the season progressed, will be a big part of the mix next season. He's on scholarship now, 5'10", 170-pound receiver out of San Diego. Had the big touchdown catch against Wyoming in the border war. They're really high on him. Kind of seems Hansley-esque, where not the biggest dude in the world, but just runs good routes, sure-handed, is certainly locked in on his playbook. All the stereotypes that we put out there about wide receivers, but he can play. I mean, that kid can definitely play. They also bring over Tay Lanier, 6'1", 165-pound transfer out of UNM a couple of years ago, was supposed to come to CSU. Believe he didn't qualify, ends up at Northern Arizona the last 2 years. He now comes full circle, ends up at CSU. I think he could potentially help offset some of that Jamari Person type role, bigger, lengthier guy, can kind of target to move the sticks there. You've also got Keenan Higgins, who came over from San Jose State last year. He hasn't played much, but he's 6'4", 170. Stephon Daly, 6'3", 180. He had a big game in the bowl game. I expect a lot more from him. And then there's a lot of young guys that we really haven't seen a ton of. Levon Brown played late, but we haven't seen much of him these last 2 years. Landon Bell, we haven't seen him yet. Corey Hall, freshman from this last year, they're really high on him. I think any of those guys could be wild cards for the receiving core. Who I'm not most intrigued by, the biggest question mark for me right now is Dylan Goffney, because I think he could be pretty impactful as a possession type receiver, security blanket, third and short type scenarios. He's got chemistry with BFN. He's been in the system for 2 years. It would be nice to keep him. I do wonder if he ultimately transfers, just given the amount of talent that they've brought in at that position this year. I don't have any guarantees or anything like that. But I am interested to see what happens with him, because they wanted him to be one of the top 3 receivers this year. Had a offseason illness thing that really prevented him from being in shape coming into the season. Didn't feel like he could be impactful, didn't want to waste his last year of eligibility. I don't think the coaching staff was stoked about his choice to redshirt. But again, I do think if you can hang on to him and have him be content, he is kind of one of those receivers where it seems like he needs to get some targets early to really be impactful. We'll see what happens there. Edwin says CJ Blocker, question mark. Yeah, he's a 4-star Utah cornerback. We also added Jahari Rogers from SMU, who was at one point committed to Nevada, flips over to CSU. So they've added some really athletic prospects, guys that had really high recruiting rankings. Their ceilings are potentially high, but there are some potential baggage that comes with transfers, and that's certainly fair to add in. You've also got some intriguing freshmen coming in Antoine Martin, 5'11", 165 pounds, out of Iowa Colony High School out in Houston, and Clarence Taylor, 6'1", 165 pounds, out of Pleasant Grove, Alabama, was the receiving leader for the state of Alabama as a junior. I know they're really excited about him. He kind of feels like the Torrey Horton, the Lewis Brown, the Jordan Ross of this class, the guy that all of the staff have been really talking up. Like when you bring up the 2025 signees, and I think they're excited about all of them. So that's not to say that if I don't mention them here, they can't be good. But the guys that I consistently hear a ton about are Clarence Taylor, D'Angelo Higgins. He's going to play DB. He played safety and wide receiver and running back in high school out of Vegas. And then Cannon Valenzuela, who we've had on the show. He was one of the first commits, a guy I've been excited about for like a year now. It honestly wouldn't shock me if, like, by the end of the year, he's one of the starting linebackers. And I don't like to say things like that about freshmen too frequently, because I'm trying not to set them up for disappointment, which is something that's very, very easily to do, or is very easy to do in the recruiting process, which is to get the cart ahead of the horse there. All right, I'm going to give you guys an update on the transfer departures, give a couple of thoughts on those, some surprising ones, I'm not going to lie. We're going to take a quick break real quick, shout out our homies, starting with our friends at Coors Light. I'm rocking the crew today. Coors Light encourages you to choose a chill mindset. It's easy to get worked up. It's easy to get frustrated. It's easy to be in a bad mood. You got to choose a chill mindset. This weekend, when it's -30 and there's 5 inches of snow on the ground, and you're out there in your driveway and you're thinking, why do I live here? Take a deep breath, put yourself in that chill state of mind. And then when you're inside, reward yourself with that ice cold Coors Light. When the mountains turn blue, it's as cold as the Rockies. You could probably just leave your beer on your back porch and it would be nice and cold for you. You don't even need a fridge this weekend. When you embrace a chill mindset, it's a good time to choose chill and crack open Coors Light. Choose chill this winter. Reach for a Coors Light. Get Coors Light delivered straight to your door by visiting CoorsLight.com/DNVR. Or you can find it pretty much anywhere that sells beer. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado. Who else we got here? I also want to shout out Circle K. Perfect. I gotta hit up Circle K on my way to Denver this evening. Big Avs Oilers game. Looking forward to that. What's good about Circle K? They are the go-to pit stop. They're all over Colorado. They've got great snacks. They've got great, like, I think they're called Polar Pops. It's like a icy type thing. It's really, really good. Sign up for the Inner Circle with the Circle K app. Receive 25 cents off per gallon on your next 5 fill-ups. Download the Circle K app. Sign up for the Inner Circle for exclusive offers, new offers, purchase clubs, and sweepstakes. They are all updated weekly. All right, you guys keep the questions, comments, etc. coming in. We'll star them and get to them here at the end of the show. Going to do my best to kind of stay on track here as we get through this transfer update, and then I'll do, like I said, a little Mountain West offseason power ranking. We're not going to go super in depth because a lot can happen, and it's a lot of speculation in terms of like who will be starting quarterback for some of these teams. But I did want to give you guys just a brief transfer departure update. As Aaron mentioned in the Toyota chat, Brown went to Missouri. Is our tight end depth going to be better or worse in 2025? Vince Brown, really good dude. Very much enjoyed my conversations with him over the last 2 years. He had a really nice fall camp, ended up being the starting tight end, which I think surprised some folks, especially with how high they were on Jackson Warren. He ends up at Missouri. He gets an extra year of eligibility granted to him due to that JUCO lawsuit thing. That was pretty surprising to me that he landed in the SEC. I don't see it. I don't see it. Now, I will gladly admit if I'm wrong, but I think he would have been replaced as CSU starting tight end anyways. So I feel pretty good about the tight end room going into this fall. But a lot of that is dependent on Jackson Warren living up to what he has been sold to be, which is kind of that Cole Turner type guy for CSU. He's listed at 6'8". He moves really well for a guy that's that big. He's really smart, former quarterback, got a great relationship with BFN. You also bring over Beers from FIU. You signed Brock Camp out of Missouri, another big tight end. So they're going to be big and athletic. You honestly just need somebody that can consistently get open across the middle and make the plays that are available to you, because I felt like there was some missed opportunities this season to attack the middle of the field. So on paper, I like the depth of the tight end position better going into 2025 than I felt going into 2024 post Dallin Holker, but we shall see there. Transfer departures. Yeah, Vince Brown going to Missouri. Chase Wilson commits to West Virginia. So he does not follow Freddie Banks to Wake Forest after all. I'll be honest, that one kind of made me say, thank God. I just didn't feel like dealing with the reaction that would have come from him also landing at Wake Forest with Newer Gatkuth, with Gabe Kershke. Freddie's going to be their secondary coach, though, too. So it's not even like he would be on the field working with those guys very frequently. I'm guessing Chase got a nice little payday to head to West Virginia. All-time great Ram, 5 years in the program, multi-year team captain, multi-year second-team all-conference player. Certainly a significant loss, but I feel good about the linebacker position, too, with some of the young guys that they've got coming in. Jacob Ellis coming over from Iowa State as well. Boom Jock lands at Cal. Him or Kershke are probably the biggest losses of the offseason. I just feel like their ceilings are really high. Jock, I think, is an NFL linebacker. Kershke, I feel like, has the chance to be an NFL defensive end, needs to put some weight on. He's got good length, good production, obviously. And Jamari Person ultimately lands at Liberty. It looked like he was going to go to UTEP for a while, so a better landing spot for him in the end than was maybe anticipated about a week ago. We'll see what happens with him there. I don't really know what to expect. I think he was one of the guys that got bad information from an agent who has already been fired. We've seen a lot of controversial posts about agents. I think the dialogue around that has been interesting this offseason, probably been one of the biggest storylines in college sports. Obviously, Caleb Goody lands at Cincinnati. 3 guys go ACC, 2 Big 12, 1 SEC. A little bit different than a couple years ago when a lot of Adazio guys dipped and landed at like Idaho and various FCS programs, a couple bottom barrel G5 teams. Certainly didn't have Vince Brown going SEC on my bingo card. Good for him. I don't think CSU is in a bad spot overall. Lost more talent on the defensive side than you would have in an ideal world, but I think they got better offensively largely. Still have some question marks about the trenches on both sides of the ball, which is significant. But I will say here, I think they've had a pretty good offseason overall. Like, I don't think that you're in a spot where you should panic. You've got great talent at the skill positions. You've got a returning quarterback. You've got a nice signing class coming in. And I think this is the best portal class, at least on paper, that CSU has signed, since I've been on the beat. So I'm really intrigued by it. I think there's an opportunity for this team to be pretty decent next year. The hope is that they're able to build off of what they did this season, take it to the next level. Obviously, a lot can happen between now and then. I do want to see what that O-line looks like in spring, but I think they're in a pretty good spot. And Aaron says, Justin lives in Denver and his beat is CSU. Within 6 months of moving to FOCO, he's assigned to the Avs beat. The dude in his workhorse Kia can't catch a break. Yeah, you're not wrong about that one. I thought me and old I-25 were going to get a little bit of a breather. It's not you, it's me, I-25. But turns out I can't quit it. I can't quit it. Can't quit you, I-25. It is fun though. It's fun to see Nathan McKinnon and Makar in person, and it's a bit of a unique time for me. There's so much going on. Like, I've got hockey tonight, and then got to get back late night because I'll go live tomorrow morning to preview hoops, and got a big weekend of that. Then I'll be back at the arena on Monday for more hockey on MLK. It's a lot of back and forth, but also I've got a pretty cool job, and I'm certainly not going to sit here and whine about that to the fine folks that support this show. So much love to all of you guys. Let's get into this Mountain West offseason power ranking, and then we'll basically get out of here. I'll answer a couple questions, comments. I know Samuel has a good one in here that we'll get to at the end. Boise State, I think they got to be at the top. They do lose Janty and Hassanin, arguably their two best players, but you got Madsen back with a new offensive coordinator, which I suppose is a bit of a wrinkle. But I think you got to have them at one. Just coming off the college football playoff, they're retaining most of their talent. I don't think they've had quite as flashy of an offseason in terms of transfer acquisitions as, say, UNLV or CSU. Utah State and San Diego State have had some high-profile transfers as well. What stands out about them is their retainment. They're not losing a ton of guys. They had a receiver go to SC, but he didn't even do much for them. So, I don't think it was that big of a deal. They're the top of the mountain until proven otherwise. UNLV I really struggled with because you lose your coach, you lose your star defensive player, you lose your quarterback, you lose so much offensively. But you bring in Dan Mullen, which is a great hire. They've signed some really high profile transfers. It'll be interesting. I'll be curious to see, does Alex Orji, for instance, find his footing in UNLV? He was terrible at Michigan. I mean, the guy struggles to throw the football, but he's a beast of a human being, an insane athlete. And again, coming back to that same conversation of, well, it didn't really translate in the Big Ten, but do those plus traits translate a little bit more in the Mountain West? I've got them at 2. I think they're still in a pretty good spot to remain relevant these next couple of years. Going to be interesting to see what happens with UNLV in the Pac-12 Mountain West battle. Kind of feels like if the Mountain West loses that lawsuit that the Pac-12 has filed regarding the poaching penalties, and they don't have that money to pay Air Force and UNLV that they promised, I wonder if UNLV reconsiders, comes to the Pac-12, and Air Force reconsiders as well, goes to the American, teams up with Navy and Army. We'll see. I do have CSU at 3. I think they've had a nice offseason. You return your quarterback, you return your coach, you've got some continuity, you've got really intriguing talent at the skill positions. They need BFN to make a leap next year. He's got tons of arm talent. He's made some incredible plays. He's been too inconsistent. Now, I think there are some factors that have worked against him there. Losing Torrey Horton was a massive deal. It's been a revolving door at receiver basically since he's taken the gig, and that's tough. It really is. Changing schemes, I don't think, played to his strengths. He's a guy who, at his best, you're spreading it out, you're out of the gun, you're going tempo. And what they did this year, I just don't think that maximized his potential. Now, it allowed him to prevent some of the negatives. He cut down on the turnovers, which was a big factor. But I also think it limited his potential to be a game changer, which I think he can be. But you need more consistency. You need more consistency there. And if you get it, and there's factors there, you need the O-line to be solid. But if he can be the guy that they envision, then this offense can really take a leap in this 4th year under Norvell. But we shall see. I think they're in a good spot, though, at 3. I almost put them at 2, and I think I would have if they had not lost so many guys on the defensive side of the ball. But that's kind of where I'm at. I think you lose your best pass rushers. your team captain in Chase Wilson and your rising star in Boom Jock. That's a tough spot, and it's just kind of an unknown for CSU on the defensive side of the ball right now. I've got Utah State at 4, largely because I thought Bronco Mendenhall was a perfect hire for them. Obviously has a ton of regional ties, but I think in the spot that they were, that was about as good of a hire as they could make. It hurts a conference opponent in the process in New Mexico. It's looking like Anthony Garcia, maybe the U of A transfer, will be their quarterback next year. But some question marks. They've lost a lot of key contributors these last couple of years. It's a strange world that UNLV, the typical Mountain West disappointment, is the prized heifer in this round of conference realignment. It says in the Toyota chat. I'm with you. And I think their value, quite frankly, is a little bit overinflated. I think the 5 Mountain West schools or whatever it was that they have right now were all more valuable long term than UNLV. And UNLV is really just about getting Vegas. And I think you can make the argument that you don't need access to, or you don't need a school in Vegas to have access to Vegas. But it is weird that basically the bottom seller of the football league for the entirety of my life is kind of the prize pig here in this process. We got Boise 1, UNLV 2, CSU 3, Utah State 4. I've got Air Force 5, San Diego State 6. Air Force at 5 is largely due to the respect for Troy Calhoun. They were a really young team this year. They did lose some guys to the portal, which doesn't typically happen for them. But they closed on a 4-game win streak. Feels like they rounded a corner there, and they'll kind of hit the ground running in 2025. San Diego State lost Danny O'Neal to Wisconsin, which is rough. Basically made this a wasted year. Like that, the whole mindset is we have this really talented, coveted freshman quarterback. He's probably not quite ready yet, but he can make some plays, and we're going to suffer those lumps in year 1 so that we can have, a really nice run after that. Psych, not in the portal era. He ends up at Wisconsin. They do bring over a couple of dual threats, and Burt Emanuel Jr. from Central Michigan, and Jaden Denegal, another Michigan transfer. Got 2 Michigan transfer quarterbacks coming into the Mountain West. I think Sean Lewis is a good hire. I think they'll be good offensively. I do wonder, after losing O'Neal and LB, are you kind of treading water here? Like, how much better are you going to be? Yeah, we'll see. I'll give a couple more thoughts on the conference realignment stuff at the end. San Jose State, I've got at 7. Walker Eget back at quarterback. No Nick Nash at wide receiver. Hawaii, 8. Freshman quarterback, got some experience late. Chang and Norvell, now the second longest tenured coaches in the league, which is wild. I've got Wyoming at 9. I was impressed by the fight that they showed. I also kind of wonder, just offensively, what's it going to look like? Seemed like they lacked an identity this year. Whaley's injury was definitely a big part of that. Caden Anderson, the freshman QB, he's shown the ability to make some plays, had a huge game against New Mexico. Didn't do much against CSU, though the receivers didn't help him there. We'll see. It wouldn't shock me if Wyoming is, a competitive team next year, maybe even a bowl team. But I kind of have some doubts about them maintaining the type of consistency we saw for the program under Craig Bull. I just think that's going to be hard to do. I've got Fresno at 10, another wild card for me, and it really comes down to what they lost. I thought Matt Entz was a really good hire from North Dakota State. Was bummed to not see Skip get the job. He's my guy. But really, you lose Malik Sherrod, your star running back, to Boise State, which is brutal. Mikey Keene goes to Michigan. That's rough as well. They do bring E.J. Warner in, Kurt Warner's kid. Looks like he'll probably be their quarterback next year. But big question mark for me. Fresno, at least since they've been in the Mountain West, seemingly are like an 8 to 10 win team, contender right there in the mix, or they're awful and they're like 2 and 10. There's not a lot of in between with that program historically. I've got them at 10. At the bottom, New Mexico and Nevada, the teams that got just raided by the portal. Jason Eck, I did feel like was a nice hire for New Mexico, all things considered. Losing Mendenhall was brutal. But on top of that, Dampier goes to Utah. Wysong goes to the U of A. They lose to their running back to USC. All their top guys went Power 4. And your coach went to a school in your same conference. That's a tough spot to be. The only reason they're not 12 is because at least they're not Nevada. At least they're not Reno. Gutted by the portal again. Brendan Lewis goes to Memphis. Aaron Frost goes to Oregon. I think their star tackle. They had a couple other guys leave. I don't know, man. Choate was talking a big game about how they would boat race CSU in a couple years. Good luck, my friend, because that is not a situation where it is easy to win, and it's getting harder and harder by the year because you can't retain anybody. When you have somebody pop, they all just leave, and that's the worst gig in the league by a pretty wide margin. And part of that is why I still have so much faith in Norvell, to be honest. To do what he did in Reno in the modern era is pretty damn impressive. And I think there was a lot of baggage attached with this CSU job. Certainly they need to achieve more. Don't get me wrong. I've said it a million times. 2024 needs to be the floor, not the ceiling. But give the guy an opportunity because he's got a hell of a lot more to cook with in Fort Collins than he ever had in Nevada. And for a guy that is that likable, that's that good of a recruiter, I just have a hard time seeing him fail. Now, I do think there are some important decisions. Adding a play caller I think would really benefit him. But I think year 4 is where we see this program finally break through. At least that's what I'm hoping for. I want to get to some questions, comments from the Toyota chat, kind of going back to what we've talked about. Aaron says, save this for the questions portion of the show. J. Mike, what are your thoughts on the closure of Campus West Crazy Carl's location? End of an era, for sure. I think it makes sense. That Campus West area is not what it was even 5-10 years ago. They've added so many luxury apartments. It's now like really in this condensed spot where it's hard to see off the street because there's just so much around it. Carl's used to basically be the only thing over there. It feels like Campus West as a whole is more about living these days and less about the hangout spots than it was when I was a kid when I was a student. Which bums me out a little bit because I was more of a Campus West guy than an Old Town. Part of that was I lived on the west side of town. It was less hassle, but like Road 34 and some of those spots over there, like that's kind of where I lived. And it's an end of an era, but I think it makes sense logistically. I know they're expanding the Timberline location. I live pretty close to the Loveland location now, actually, which I had recently. It was great. I love Crazy Carl's. I love Nate Haas. He's a man that's been very, very good to me over the years. They sponsored my site when I had Rams Report. Gave me a job when I needed one part-time to, make ends meet. So I've got a lot of love for Crazy Carl's. It's weird. Fort Collins has changed so much over the last 10, 15 years, and I think the next 10 years we're about to see it change even more. But it's the world we're in, man. It's all changing quickly. Aaron also says UNLV is a depreciating asset. The more pro teams that Vegas gets, the less interest people have in UNLV. Spot on. I think UNLV would be more that, well, maybe not. The Raiders Stadium, I guess, is part of it, but especially now that they're going to get like an NBA team and they've got an NHL team, like they're going to maybe get a baseball team. I don't really know what's happening with the A's. Maybe we can get Jenny Kavanaugh on the show, although she probably can't say anything about it. Anyways, I think Vegas's value as a whole gets overstated because anybody can play in Vegas without having a school there. And the locals just don't give a shit about UNLV. Like you see the TV viewership and they're in the hundreds, even these last couple of years when they've been really good. There's just too much to do there, like outside of going to the games. Josh says Fresno State going to turn into Iowa West. Brian Ferentz is the tight ends coach. I could kind of see that working for them, though. They've always run the ball pretty well and had good offensive lines, been pretty decent in the trenches. Fresno, that area, like you have some kind of farm area in that part of, not Fresno itself, but like that part of California that maybe you could kind of lean into that like meat and potatoes style program. We'll see. I guess their best teams historically, they've had some quarterbacks that could kind of rip it. But I did not think about that they could be kind of Iowa West. And then now we're seeing, I'm surprised we haven't seen Jules and Chase chirp about Carl's closing a location. That's an OG CSU Twitter reference. I don't even think those guys are online these days, or maybe I have some of them muted. I don't know. I'm just kidding. I've got love for everybody in Ram Nation, but God, did they hate Nate and Crazy Carl's. There was like a stretch there for 3-4 years where it felt like those guys were always just going at it. That's a deep cut. There's probably a lot of young people in the audience listening that have no idea what we're talking about right now. CSU Twitter 10 years ago was a wild place, and I don't know if you guys saw it, but I have been writing about CSU for 10 years now, which is insane. It has flown by. It's been interesting. I started at the Collegian, did my own thing for a while, worked at Mile High Sports, did some freelance stuff, ultimately come over to DNVR, where I've now been for almost 6 years, more than half of my career, which is pretty wild to think about. But I just wanted to say shout out to all you guys, because none of this would be possible without you. I think it's been pretty incredible, the growth we've been able to have on the DNVR Rams community with this show. The numbers usually do pretty solid. We've got active participants. We've got people that are engaged and locked in week after week. And I just never would have saw that coming, man, which is pretty crazy. So shout out to all you guys. You guys make my dreams come true. I'll be going live tomorrow. We're going to be setting the scene for a big time border war in Laramie, big time basketball matchup, CSU men's hoops. Probably a must win if they want to keep pace with that top third of the league or so. That's all I've got for you guys today. Hope you enjoyed the show. I know we were kind of all over the place, but I thought it was a fun one. Much love, y'all. Always proud to be. Peace.
We all silly like the mayor.